Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Lighthouse Sessions. And in today's episode, I'm really excited. My dear friend and long lost brother, Stone, is joining us from Australia. And Stone, I really appreciate you getting up early. Why don't you tell my audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you would describe yourself as being a visionary entrepreneur?
Sure. Thank you for having me here, Jeff. So my name is Stone G. I believe that if I'm looking at a title or something to describe me vocationally, it's a counselor, and I work specifically with visionary entrepreneurs. That's my pond, my niche, and of course, there's a lot more to it. I have maybe 7 or 8 verticals that are all contributing towards building what we're calling a city, a, a visionary city for people that are similar to us. And the reason why I'm focusing on that is so that we have an ecosystem where we're able to thrive. It's really difficult to understand, internalize ableism while one is in the environment of it.
I love that. Thank you. And would you mind describing enablism? But first, I want to point out the fact that I recognize, and I'm learning this as I go, when I ask a visionary entrepreneur to tell me a little bit about what they do, that's usually a long list. So that, by the way, is my defining feature. Most people, I say, what do you do? And they'll say, I'm a carpenter, I'm a plumber, I'm an accountant. I love that you needed an explanation to say I'm a visionary, and I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, it's probably more appropriate for us to describe ourselves as multidimensional enablers. And if someone says, "Well, what is it that you enable?" We enable life and love. That's not specific, but that truly is what we do. The people that I'm working with, one of the things they always remark is, "Wow, they'll say this to me, but they're talking about themselves. They'll say, I did not know that I had this within me."
Yeah. And it's fascinating. I've yet to meet a visionary entrepreneur who didn't somehow unprompted, and I know I can say this with you because it would probably come up. They talk about gratitude, they talk about love, and they don't see how that's separate from business.
Absolutely. Yeah, you nailed it. Matter of fact, with all of the verticals and the teams that I'm engaging with these verticals, I have that as part of our values, and values are very distinct from a mission statement or a vision statement. Values are an embodiment of it's values are it's a snapshot of how you live your life. And so when we're doing the things that we're doing, I will say to them, well, how is this enabling more love to expand for our customers? And they scratch their head, and it's like, oh, he really wants an answer.
This
So
is an actual question, right? All right. Now, for the record, Stone and I were separated at birth. We are brothers, so I will interrupt him. He's probably going to interrupt me. If you don't like ADHD, you're on the wrong podcast. Um, the thought that's coming to my mind, and I need to share, is I've used the word creator a lot, and I just realized that mortals, neurotypicals, take that as an offensive because usually big C, creator, is the word that people use for God. I see it as a small c creator, but the reality is I don't understand scarcity mindsets where people are fighting over how do we allocate resources. I come from a world of abundance, and it's like, how do we create more so that we all have enough?
yeah, Yeah, I agree. And to use the God metaphor, we are God. If 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 we're going to talk about God, we are created by God, we are the movement of God, and that includes the way we decide to think, the way we decide to feel, uh, even the sensations that we have in our body. And some people think, oh well, I can't help what I'm thinking. Well, you can. You can. and it's a condition of how we decide to architect our environment, which is
Yeah.
another reason why I'm working with a group of people to build a city for our people.
Well, I think it's fascinating. And for the record, I've been there where I thought I was a victim of circumstance. And then one day when I had this aha moment, somebody, was kind enough to educate me. They said, Jeff, you're responsible for everything you create in this world. And my first reaction, I'm going to be honest, was screw you. I can't believe I picked all these things. And then when I started to look at it, I was like, oh, thank God I am responsible. Because if I'm responsible, I can change it.
That's
If
right.
I'm
Yeah.
not, I'm just woe is me. I may as well call it a day and pray for an early, untimely death, because
Yeah.
otherwise I'm just a victim for the rest of my days.
That's another really beautiful thing about our community as visionaries. We're not a you can't say this person is a visionary and you know what you're going to get. You're going to get so much more. And one of the attributes that's in that is intersectionality, and not accepting not accepting uh, different people. It's a celebration of people, and that is so. There's a real difference. Whenever I'm hearing someone talking about, uh, oh, we need to be inclusive, or let's accept our differences, I just it makes me cringe. I can't be around that because that's it, and that for our time right now, that's considered very progressive
Yeah.
to say that. But can you imagine saying to your child, um, I'm going to include you?
Yeah. I
No,
like you now. I'm going to include you in the family. You can come on family outings.
you, my child, you're part of me.
Yeah.
Let's grow together. So I'm not, even though the politics of our time right now is uh, canceling DEI, and it is harming a lot of people. It is, from my context, giving us an opportunity to unpack some of our beliefs around equity.
Well, let's explore equity and enablism, because one of the things I will be honest, my brain can't process DEI. And the reason I can't process it is I don't think in terms of, like you said, I wouldn't pick my favorite kid. If the house was on fire, I'm going to save my entire family, not say, you're not my favorite, so I'm going to leave you at home. But to me, diversity, equity, inclusion feels like it should be a goal of every human being, not something you have to tell me to do. Because if you have to tell me to do it, it probably doesn't come naturally to me. But
Yeah. Well, well, when we look at the nepotism that exists in, I would say, Western culture, uh, that's why DEI exists. If we are in a system where love is our metric, then we don't need to tell people, oh, we don't need affirmative action, we don't need DEI. There are so many things that, but the system itself is inherently, I don't, if I say toxic, then that doesn't really capture it. The system is not designed, and I'm talking about Western capitalism, is not designed for people to thrive.
yeah.
For people to exist in that system, it has to be built upon a large base of those who go without. So that's why they have that. and rather than people saying, "Oh wait, it's the system," they're pointing. It's like the emperor with no clothes. You're pointing at the wrong thing.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, I'm not opposed to equity. I'm not opposed to diversity. I'm not opposed to inclusion. It just, again, it's like ordering somebody to love their neighbor. It's like, how do you enforce that? And
Yeah,
by the way, if you say you will love your neighbor, how do you enforce what that love looks like? And how do you measure what it should be? And I think, I find it fascinating, and I'm just going to point this out. You struggle with the word, how do you describe the system? And I love that you landed on it wasn't built for this. It's not broken, it's not corrupted. Western capitalism was not built for equality. It was literally the system built by the wealthy to make themselves more wealthy. And in that model and in that time, if we go back a couple hundred years, it was scarcity, and I needed to control the wealth if I wanted to be wealthy. Whereas
yeah.
now, I think if you get into the world, it's, if we create the wealth, we can enforce the narrative, and we can break down some of those walls that no longer serve us.
Yeah, there are too many people on the planet right now that are realizing that a particular narrative doesn't work. It, and it's suffering because even we can look at our education systems for the Western world. There's zero chance that that's scalable because it wasn't designed for the things that people are using it for and that they want it for. It's not designed to do that. Look at anyone that has an autistic child. If you want to do your child a disservice, send them to a Western style education model.
Yeah.
They're going to need therapy.
Yeah. And I think that's the big shame, is that we've lost the narrative on what's important. And, I don't know if you and I have even talked about this, but I've been listening to a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes. And it's a fascinating podcast because a, a documentary, a documentarian, her name is, I think, Kai Dickens or something like that. She was hearing rumors about nonverbal kids communicating through telepathy.
Mm.
And more importantly, she was hearing rumors that entire possibility was being squashed by Western science. Literally, and it's fascinating, and I have a feeling you're going to get as addicted to it as I was. The episodes, the thing that outraged me is that nonverbal kids, there is a new field of study where they can use different devices. They're called spellers now, and they can spell, and through the spelling, they can speak. Basically, it's like Stephen Hawking. He's got a computer that speaks on his behalf. The entire medical, educational, and therapeutical communities have said, nope. 20 years ago, kids had help with spelling. Therefore, they're not their words. It's the adult doing their thing. So because there was bad science in the beginning, they're ruling it out today. And actually, there's a couple of bodies. If you are part of that body, I think one was the psychiatry community. If you come out in favor of spelling and you don't dismiss telepathy, you get banned and you lose your license.
That's harsh.
And it's fascinating because it's like these kids don't have a voice, and the one tool that can give them a voice, we're saying no, it's bad, let's banish it. I feel like if we were a just society, we'd be like, maybe we should explore this and do the right studies, do whatever we need to do to validate it so that it's in the hands of every kid who is nonverbal.
Yeah, I hear that, and it reminds me that we still don't have a working definition of productivity.
Yeah.
And so the speller that you're referring to, when I look at that, it also, because I remember with my own son, he didn't speak until he was maybe about 4. And they would say that he had a speech problem. I never subscribed to that because I could feel what he was communicating. I could feel what he wanted. I guess what I'm alluding to is, why are we forcing people to communicate in a particular way?
Yeah. Well, it's
Why?
actually fascinating. There was a child, I think in the UK, he was nonverbal for a while, and then he learned how to speak. And then as an adult, he chose to stop speaking because he was tired of listening to us. And again, I will give him some credibility. I haven't done the science, but I'm willing to believe things. But he said, you know what? Spoken communication is primitive, inefficient, and it takes energy.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. So it was fascinating that he learned to speak and then chose to go back to being nonverbal.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how it is for my son even now. It's that our intention, the feelings of our intention, is the way we connect over the words that we use.
Yeah,
So
and
I remember speaking with a occupational therapist, and I was saying, well, rather than forcing him to do all of these things that the state says that he needs to do, why don't I learn his communication style and his learning style? If I could do that, then he is going to be able to function in the way that he wants to function. I never had this idea that I had to force him to learn all these things that all the other kids
mhm.
are. Why is that important? Why do we have to learn it? And before we can say that, what exactly is learning? What is thinking? What
Yeah.
constitutes a thought? And that's not really something that's discussed in academia. I understand why academia has the prowess that it does, but it's unfounded.
Yeah. Well, and the sad part is, I know you as a father, you're trying to find solutions. And I know from other people I've talked to, it feels like the world wants to give you a whole bunch of hurdles, not solutions.
Yeah, yeah. It just in us having this conversation, it reminds me that the solutions that we have are not outside of us.
Yeah.
They're inside. And to the extent that you and I'm making an I statement rather than a global absolute. To the extent that you and I can communicate, but more specifically commune,
Yeah.
because that carries different energy to it. When we're in communion, that's when there's an allowance of possibility, miracles, and abundance. And so replicating that collectivistic, um, allowing that embodiment, that's God.
Yeah. Well, and I love the word commune because it is the root, the heart of communication. Yet a lot of people think communication is I speak, you listen, and I do whatever I need to do to convince you of my point. What if you and and I know you and I do this all the time, what if we came together and said, how do we find ways to make the world a better place together? There's no convincing the other that this is a good thing. It's we both get it and we want to move forward. Um, well, let's talk about, I know you're building a city, so let's talk about what you're doing in Australia at this moment and how my world of visionary entrepreneurs can either get on board with you or can support you.
Mhm. Yeah. It's the premise of the city. It is controversial and divisive. Not to me, of course. Uh, 'Cause I'm
Or
committed to.
me, just for the record.
But there are some people that I have a conversation with about the philosophy, because it's a complete transformation of the way people would think. And just if I were to dumb it down, wealthy people have their gated communities, and they see no issue with making sure that they are quote unquote safe and that they are with their people. And there's a lot of restriction in being able to get into a gated community or a country club or these types of things. And what I'm suggesting is that we have an ecosystem where our people are able to thrive, and it, it it's it makes complete sense to me, because imagine you and I are in a sewage system, and we both have to take showers, but the only way to take a shower is with the active, chunky, raw sewage that is in that sewage system. We can bathe 10 to 20 times a day, and we are never going to be clean.
No.
And so I make that analogy just for the visceral nature of it, not to say that being in an holistic world is toxic. That's not what I'm saying at all. I mean, the holistic world is what it is. But if we want to have an environment where we're able to thrive as humans, one of the powers that we have is to create environment. And if we look at nature, what we can also do is be in harmony collectively in nature. That's one of the powers that humans have. It's just that the Western mindset does not see that. They don't identify that. They see that they see, okay, let's get together and let's have business as normal. Let's do what we've always done in this new ecosystem. Let's destroy it. We're going to bring our models from the old place and do it here. And that's not what this city is about. This city, contrary to other utopian ideals, this city is being designed from the first cornerstone with culture, and the culture being love. That's the primary ingredient, and all the other bricks that are being used to build this are different flavors or frequencies of love.
And I think that's a great, and it's a terribly disgusting analogy, but it's perfect because we want, I know so many people who are doing inner work, they're, shadow work, they're doing meditation, they're doing breath work, trying to get to their best version of themselves. And I can attest to this. I leave my house and I encounter somebody who isn't working on themselves. I'll just be polite there. And it brings me down to their level.
Mm-hmm.
Driving is an example. I've seen so much road rage around me lately, and it's like, what have we come to? And
Yeah.
it's not that I want to be part of the road rage, but some days you're like, wow, I'm trying to stay out of whatever's going on between those two. I've learned to be very defensive as a driver, and it's like, I personally think I'm a good driver. It's just when you're on a track where people are trying to hit each other, you're going to get hit at some point.
Yeah. And that's a wonderful observation that underpins the culture that we're in.
Yeah.
And we have all these laws that prevent or prohibit specific behaviors. Why hasn't anyone said, oh, it's because of our culture? why don't we start addressing culture? Then these other things would not exist. We could live in harmony. But people think it's too hard. It's not hard. We just have to have the will to do it. It's it's our children. Sometimes they may have behaviors that are not safe, but they're not aware that it's not safe. And so we guide them in a way that they start to recognize, it's not appropriate for me to run out in the street when there's traffic. I understand why that's not going to work for me long term.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about your inspiration for this, and why did you pick Australia? Let's talk about the fun, weird stuff that is fascinating.
Sure. Well, I decided to move to Australia because I was in the military, U.S. military, and out of all the countries that I've been to, Australia at that time of my life had the right mix of all the things that I wanted for safety, for being able to thrive, for being able to live the kind of life that I wanted. When I was in the U.S., it was a little bit more fraught. I can remember being pulled over for various reasons that had nothing to do with violating a particular law. And so when I went to the U.S., I realized that, and it was almost immediate, I realized, this is not something that I want to be a part of. I'm not going to try to negotiate with these people and try to get them to see, hey, it could be a better way, because they've been entrenched in that system for several generations. So that was part of my reason for moving to Australia was self-preservation and being able to be human. And in that ecosystem, I was able to learn new things about myself, about life, about humanity, about love and life. And so now I'm no longer constrained to Australia. I go to Europe and I primate my pond is Europe and Australasia.
I love that. And I think, I have mixed feelings, and I think you know this. I love what you're doing with the city, and I see us, if we retreat from the world is a lesser place because of it. And I also see that, I think you've shared some examples. When we're the enlightened jewel on the top of the hill, everybody's going to want to come over our wall and take what we've built. How would you address that? Because you've convinced me. I'm just that's something that originally I stumbled.
Yeah, that comes from a scarcity mindset. Historically, you're right. That kind of thing can happen, but we're not excising ourselves from humanity. That's impossible. The autistic genome has been in existence since the beginning of humanity. We're not an aberration. We didn't just show up. We've always been here. And we are necessary for humanity to exist. So the city is not to escape from. It is, I'll use common language. It's a city of refuge. It's where we can collaborate, be together, grow, and not have to fight against ourselves with this thing of internalized ableism. It's like when I was in the U.S., being African American, I knew that I was African American because they would tell me. And when I went to a store, I would be followed, and all these things that you hear in the media, and you think, oh no, that's not. It doesn't happen that way anymore. I mean, this was in the 90s that these things, and they're still happening. And contrast that to when I moved to Australia, my my limbic system, it started to relax. And I started feeling peace, and I was, oh, I'm no longer in this a threat. I'm no longer in fight or flight. I'm no longer thinking, okay, how can I, when I go to the store, where should I go? How should I approach? I didn't have to think about those things.
Which store can I go into?
Exactly.
And I'm going to put a word out there, but to me, it feels like that hypervigilance would drain your battery. And I'm guessing just a simple run a couple of errands would be, oh, do I have it in me today? Okay, maybe today I'm going to stay home. I'll see if I can find it on Amazon.
Yeah, well, back then we didn't have those options.
Yeah.
and I was younger, and so I had a lot more. I had a lot more spoons back then.
Yeah.
And I didn't know who I was. You know, I didn't know about my proclivities, so I burned at both ends. And when I reflect on that, oh, okay, now I understand why I was doing what I was doing, and it really was a blessing for me to make the choices that I did. But that wasn't all me. It wasn't because I am enlightened or anything.
Well, and for what it's worth, I find, I use the word enlightened, and that sometimes offends people. And if anybody's offended by it, that's okay. You're not meant to be part of this conversation. But I find enlightenment, for me, it comes in really, it's almost snippets. It's like, okay, you and I are old enough. I don't know if everybody's going to get this, but back in the day when we used to hand tune a radio, God forbid, you'd be like, I grew up in the country, and depending on which direction the wind was blowing and if the sun was shining, we got certain AM channels, certain FM channels, and you'd sit there and you'd be like, okay, I know it's here on the dial. And I think a lot of enlightenment, it's like that. You hear all this noise, and then you're like, okay, everybody, shh, we got it. And I used to think that, in my younger days, I thought enlightenment was you found the signal and you heard it all the time. I picture the Dalai Lama just sitting up on a hill, and he's got his direct link to the universe. I find, and maybe it's just where I'm at in my journey, I still get a lot of air, static and dead air time. So
when I consider enlightenment, the capacity to metamorphosize, to transform, I'm noticing more and more that is part of the ecosystem, or the ingredients that go with collectivism. So being with people, for instance, you and I having this conversation, you and I already have an agreement, and our agreement is to reverence one another, and it makes it so much easier for us to commune, because I don't have a sense of, okay, I need to prove my point. No, I already know that you're in reverence of who I am, and vice versa.
Yeah, so we don't have that friction point.
Exactly. So having that from a collective perspective, where we have a group of people who may be dissimilar.
Yeah.
So there aren't that many communities where what you and I are talking about exist. The one non-homogeneous example is with the Seventh-day Adventist. I'm thinking of a blue zone that's in California. They're not homogeneous, but they're brought together by a particular belief system. Mm-hmm. And it is possible for our people to come together using some of those same tenets. Their guiding principles have to do with the genesis of what it is to be human, which is love.
Yeah. Well, and now, as I understand it, and this is me evolving and starting, because my first thought is, if we turn our backs on the world's going to go to hell, and then they're going to come to our door. but now I'm seeing it as more of a sanctuary. Think about, like, I'm going to use it as a university because I'm a nerd, and that makes sense to me. By becoming a student, becoming a member of that campus, you're not turning your back on the rest of the world and saying, screw you. You're saying, I'm going here to better myself,
Mhm.
hopefully, or you're just doing it because mom and dad are paying and you want to get back at them. But,
Mhm.
hopefully you're there to better yourself. And then when you go back to your family, you go back to the real world, you take a better version of yourself with you.
Yes, yes, I understand. And one of the things that I'm doing is documenting the entire process of how the city is being built, because I want, uh, when the city is well, it'll never be finished, but when the city is at a place where we're taking the first, we're not onboarding, but we're bringing in the first citizenry. I intend to gift the blueprints for how we organize that. And I think most people would say, oh, okay, when you give us the blueprints, you're going to give us all your technology, how you did your hyperbaric chambers and that. No, and the blueprints are actually, this is the way we built our culture.
Yeah.
These philosophically, these are the things that we're focusing on collectivistically, and that's why we're able. So all these technological advances, they exist because of how we're thinking and feeling about one another, how we're
Yeah.
choosing to think and feel.
Well, the thing that fascinates me, and I'm resonating with this deeply, is that a lot of people will mistakenly think that the bricks and mortar that built the buildings are what makes it unique, but it's the hands that placed the bricks that are unique, and the
Yeah.
hearts and the minds. Like, and again, some cultures, you give me a brick, I'm going to throw it at my neighbor because they're annoying me,
Mm.
whereas this is about building together.
Yes, I remember when I was younger, there was this really popular question. Whenever you go on a show or you get interviewed by someone, they'd say, "So, who are your mentors? Who are the people that really inspire you?" And when I was younger, I, I thought about the question, and it was impossible for me to lie. And I'd say, "No one. That's a ridiculous thing to ask me. Why would you ask me that when we have the world, we have
Yeah.
nature?" And I would always say, well, nature, look at nature embodies everything that we need to learn, which is not to take away from anyone who says, oh, my hero is such and such a figure, right? That's not what that means.
Yeah.
um, and that's one of the things that I'm bringing to the city, and all the people who are collaborating with me, that we're bringing that intentionality of, there's a frequency, there's an energy that has made being possible.
Yeah.
That is our inspiration.
And I'm fascinated, and for what it's worth, whenever I find myself struggling, I look to nature and go, oh, damn it, I'm violating natural law again. This week's meditation actually brought something up I'll share. I realized that by definition, vast majority of human endeavor, we qualify as invasive species,
Absolutely.
because we're looking to control and destroy. And it's like, what if we lived in harmony with nature? And I have a friend who is a shaman for an indigenous tribe in North America, and I'm like, we had all of this knowledge, we learned to work with earth, and then at some point in the industrial revolution, we said, screw you, planet, we're better than you. we're
Yeah.
gonna we're gonna exert our will, and you know I feel like we've lost the plot that we are not lord of all we see. We're not the rulers. And there's an ancient indigenous saying that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children.
Yeah, we're meant to be stewards.
Yeah.
And stewardship does not is does that's not ownership.
Yeah. And that it's fascinating to me, because when you start to look at institutions, and again, I'm not here to get political. You look at the Vatican, you look at the British monarchy, they get that it's about the next 1,000 years, not about the last decade. There's that, you have to look at, if you think about the life of the Earth, 5 billion years, humans haven't even been a rounding error in that time. Yeah. Yet we're like, oh, everything's about us. No, it's not.
No, and I would like to be a little bit more specific. When you said that humans are an invasive species, if I were going to be more accurate, I would say that Western culture is both a cancer and a virus, but humans don't have to be part of that.
Yeah,
part of that parasitic way of being, and exactly right. Our forefathers, our ancestors, did not live this way. They recognized that the earth was the same as self. There was an identity of the environment being who we are.
Well, it's fascinating, Stone. If you look at history, the explorers who found North America, and I say found, there's, it was always there. So it's not like they just manifested it. But, if you think about the seafaring people that came over to discover new lands, they lived in harmony with the sea. If they didn't, they drowned. The sea was not a forgiving environment. They either starved to death, they drowned, or they died of scurvy. And yet somehow, once they landed on whatever shore and planted a flag, they lost sight of the fact that that's a choice. And I love that. I think, we can choose to be the seeds that generates the next generation of positive, or we can be the cancer or virus that destroys the next generation. And I do believe that is a choice.
It is. That's one of the attributes of being human, is we do get to choose these things, and we have more choice, more options, contingent upon the environment that we allow ourselves to be in.
Mm-hmm.
You hear so many people saying, "Oh, well, I can't because of whatever condition." Change your conditions, change your environment. You have that capacity. Go find someone else. I facilitated a network, and one of the complaints that a few of the business owners have is that they have difficulty finding customers. And I said, you don't, that's not the problem.
It's an interesting choice, but yes, it's
that you don't have a problem of finding more customers. You may not be in alignment with the value that you're providing for the world, because if you are being the value that you are, and you're illuminating that, people are going to go to you. There's going to be a queue of people who are lining up to be around you. In business terms, they call it attraction marketing. But for us, it's just being love.
Well, we could go down in that rabbit hole, and it fascinates me. All of the language of traditional marketing is so violent and aggressive. It's like, you talk about targets, and you talk about, I hate the compensation scheme under where they call it "you eat what you kill." That doesn't leave a lot of room for love on the table. It's kind of like, it does not ever end well for the prey, does it?
I was laughing because I know when I'm working with someone, when I look at their content, if I see the word dominate, or be number one, or
we're going to crush the competition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or the specific word is success. If I see that anywhere in there, I like, no, I'm not going to work with you. I can't be around you.
It is it's a fascinating world. Now, I could talk to you all day. I do want to be mindful that it is a different time zone, and I'm sure you've got other things to do today. How can people in my network, because reality is, if they like me, they're going to like you. If they don't like me, well, they shouldn't be in my network in the first place. How can people get in touch with you? How can they just get to know you?
Yeah, through LinkedIn. That LinkedIn's probably the easiest. That has all my doodads. Uh, and my profile is open, so anyone can find me.
Awesome. And I will put the link in the show notes. Stone, I really appreciate you getting up to hang out with me. It's always a pleasure. We will do this
Yeah,
again sometime soon.
yeah. Thank you,
Thank you for being on the show.
thank you, Jeff. I appreciate any time that that we get to spend together.
Right back at you, buddy.